our next session is a panel, and we've got 3 people on the panel. We've got Jim Pendergest, who you've already met, who's the Director of Services at Keeneland and also runs the Thoroughbred Center in Lexington, a training center. Leif Dickenson, who is the Superintendent at Del Mar Racetrack, and Sean Gault, who is a retired Director of Racing Surfaces at Woodbine and is an equine racing specialist at DCS and Associates. So I will introduce the 3 of them, and we've got a number of questions for them. What I like about this panel is we kind of represent a range of regions that are relevant here. We go from Ontario to Kentucky to Southern California with very different issues. Leif and Sean have spent many, many years between them working with turf, and Jim, as I mentioned before, has taken a deep dive. So I'm interested in the timing, the frequency, and settings each of you use for aeration. So you might have to introduce your racing schedules to remind people who aren't aware, since that's what you have to work around. Jim, do you mind going first and telling us what you're doing as far as aeration? I think you briefly mentioned it before.
Sure. With the Keeneland race meet, we kind of have an advantage, a lot less challenges than some of the tracks, because we only race for 3 weeks twice a year. Our race meets come in April and October. The problem with those are their prime growing seasons, so it's really tough. Coming in April, the grass really hasn't started to jump. And then in October, when we should be seeding, we're having a race meet. So we have a little bit of a disadvantage, but the fact that we've only got 3 weeks gives us some advantage over tracks that are racing a lot of the year. But what we're doing with respect to aeration right now is about 6 times a year. And we're using the large core, which would be a 1-inch time on the vertidrain twice a year. And we'll do that right after each race meet. That does a lot of things for us. It not only provides the aeration, but it brings the sand back up, which helps offset some of the organic material that you gain through the year. So we're adding some sand by bringing it up, and then it really helps level out the footprints. After we do the aeration, we'll roll it and it smooths out the track. We'll use the small core aerator with 1/2-inch tines about twice a year. And that's during the summer months when we don't want to do quite as much damage to the track. And then right before each race meet, about 3 weeks out, we'll use the vertidrain with the bayonet tines, which I don't think those were on the display a little while ago, but it's more like a knife blade. So it really does very little damage, and we're comfortable with doing that right before the race meet, that we're not going to do any damage before the races start. And then the final thing we do is the aggravator after each race meet. It also helps us smooth out the surface.
You know, you make a good point that is very specific to the equine application. It does help solve the issue with the divots or the holes and the unevenness of the racing surface to aerate as well. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It smooths out. It's incredible how much difference there is with the large core and then the aggravator after the race meet. You know, we've got a rough surface before we do that. After we do that, we put the roller on it. It's like a pool table.
Sean, like Jim, you deal with cool weather grass, but you also have variable soil types on your different tracks. Well, you've got 2 different tracks at Woodbine, and you've dealt with tracks other places. You have native soil, sand profile, as well as a fiber reinforced surface. So how do you deal with that issue, and what do you use for timing for your aeration?
Good morning. Our racing season, the race season at Woodbine goes from about the 3rd week of May to the end of October, and sometimes it'll extend into the 1st or 2nd week of November. We have there's 3 tracks at Woodbine, and just a bit about them. Like the EP Taylor is 22 acres, and it's got 2 types of sand in it. The back stretch, the old section, has about 6 acres of a very wide gradation sand that tends to compact easily. And the other 16 acres is a more uniform, well-draining sand topsoil blend. The inner course, the new course, is about 10 acres. It's got a very well-draining sand, uh, based on the profile of the EP Taylor with a sand topsoil blend. But it also has, as Mick mentioned, 3/4 inch fiber blended into the top 4 inches. So with that track will also tend to tighten up more quickly. And then the third is a training track, which is a 9-acre sandy loam, which is very much like a topsoil. And then that if you got real dry weather, that can tighten up pretty quick too. But we treat each course very similar as to what cultural practices we're going to perform on the course. And so this would include deep tine aeration and core aeration in the program. Now we'll vary the intensity of each operation or the number of times we do it depending on the course. Essentially, we'll start in the spring will be one of the main programs. So we're going to start late March, early April, but that'll coordinate depending on how the weather is and bringing our staff back from layoff. But the spring aeration does give you more time for recovery before the races are going to start, as long as the soil starts warming up adequately. The next major time is certainly the fall, and then we would start mid-October. We shut down the training turf and we would aerify that course, and would be with deep tine aeration and followed by core aeration. And then for the EP and the inner turf in November, when those tracks close, then we'd renovate there, and we'd be going in with a deep tine aeration and probably following right behind it with a core aeration. Difficulty there is that now you're at the end of the growing season. There'll be, if you're in mid-November, you have frost in the morning. The days are shorter. 5 o'clock, it's dark, so you've got a very much reduced recovery time for the track. Now we'll try and work in additional renovations through the season. For example, the training track will shut down for 2 weeks in August to do a complete renovation, and that would include both deep tining, aeration, and core. And the inner turf, last year Ryan shut it down for 2 weeks, and they'll probably do the same again this year. And with the fiber, find the tracks tightening up quickly, so you want to run the deep tine aerator through it to try and loosen it up and allow the horses to be able to get a little bit better bite into the turf. And certainly being a smaller, like a 7 furlong, 7/8 track, you've got tighter turns. You want the horses to be able to get a grip into the turf. For the EP, we don't get shut down during the season, but there are areas that we will try and work on. For example, if you're running, most of our races are running on one turn, then on that turn, if we can take a lane out of operation, as we're moving our rail, there's 5 lanes, you take a lane that's just been run on, then we will deep tine it, possibly core it, but not necessarily. But we find the deep tining can really help level off the lane. And then we'll follow in, of course, with seeding and possibly top dressing and fertilizing. We won't do that every time, because if you're do it one time and you come back 3 weeks later and you're in that lane, or 4 weeks, it may be a little too soon. So we'll try and assess that lane as to what it really needs. The other 2 areas that we would aerify in that course is the EP Taylor is an outer course. And so we unsaddle every race on the tapeta. So you have the horse people, jocks, and valets are crossing the turf every race. So we put walkways out, we move the walkways, but you can noticeably tell the difference in compaction in that area. So then we'll try and aerify across that section at least a couple of times through the season, but you have to coordinate it between what lanes you're running on in order to keep it balanced across the track. The other areas on the EP that our starting gate runs up and down the outside of the back stretch in order to get to starting positions, and sometimes it has to be brought around to the front stretch. So the gate creates a great deal of compaction. All of our equipment that we take out on the turf to work goes around the outer rail of the track. So every 4 to 5 weeks, we will deep tine 2 to 3 passes on the outside rail of the track just to keep things loosened off there. And especially in the backstretch where if we're in lane 5, well, horses could actually end up running in that gate path for a portion of the race. If we're doing a deep tine, then we're probably using either a 3/4 inch or a 1 inch tine, and we're going to try and go down 8 to 11 inches, depending on which course we're on, and then have somewhere 5% to 15% kick. And if we're going to be racing, then a forward spacing of 8 to 9 inches. If we were going to leave the course, maybe at the end of the season, we may move it closer, but then our time is often short at that time of the year. And then we would follow right in with a core aerifier going 3 to 4 inches depth, and then screen or brush the sand in. And rare that we would vac the tops off, but we might. And there's thanks, then Mick.
Boy, that is a huge amount of effort that goes into aeration. I mean, that's just, I mean, I think that's what I see as the biggest thing that I get out of this is how much effort has to go into keeping the surface so that the grass can grow and you can have a consistent surface for the horses. Wow. Leif has been having some connection problems, but Leif, if you have a somewhat different situation, since you have both fiber in your soil as well as having Bermuda. If you're connected, I'll let you talk about what your protocol is. All right, we may have to come back to Leif. I just admitted him again. So I guess this kind of leads us into both of you. I'll let Jim take this first. What do you generally think how long do you think the turf needs to recover after aeration? And you kind of already answered this because you use the different types of tines. Is that correct?
Yes, and it depends on which one we're using. Like the bayonet tines on the vertidrain, I'm more than comfortable going 3 weeks out from the race meet with that. And actually, if we found we had a problem with compaction during the race meet, I wouldn't really have any hesitation to use that while we were racing. It does very little damage to the turf, but it does help reduce some compaction and let some air get into the surface. With the 1 inch or 3/4 inch core that we do, I would want it to have a month's recovery from that. And then when we use the aggravator, I really like to have more recovery because we're really disturbing the root system. And we're adding a lot of air underneath with that. And it gets pretty soft after using the aggravator. So I like to see at least 6 weeks if we can do it before horses are back on it after the aggravator.
So I'll let Sean, what do you think is your recovery time after aeration? What do you feel comfortable with the different types of protocols?
Well, as to what I feel comfortable with is a difficult question to answer. It's not like there's a study or a guide that says what works, but it would vary with the season and maybe how much root or surface disturbance we've done. If we're deep tining, certainly the 3/4 is less than the 1 inch. We've put I want a minimum of 2 weeks if we're deep tining. And then we're also, I would say, if we're going with a longer space between, like if we're going 9 inches, I'd be more comfortable. But if we're going shorter than that, then it would, like Jim was saying, I definitely want to lengthen this out. I think with the core aerifier, I think it tends to do a little more surface damage. And so I would want a little bit more time to let it recover. But having said that, similar to what Jim's saying, if you're going with maybe a smaller tine, little less damage, but still accomplishing something, then you can narrow your window a little bit. I definitely think whatever we're doing, especially when we do a lot during the summer, is that you've got to get water to it. And water, in addition to that's supplied by your irrigation system, because if you're racing in one area and aerifying in another, you may not want your big sprinklers on. So I think you need to bring supplementary water in where you can have smaller sprinklers hitting that lane, using something like K lines that you can move along and water a lane and not impact the lanes that you are racing on. Thanks.
Thank you. I see Leif is back on here, and if he can unmute, maybe we can get some input from him on how often he aerates.
All right, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, geez. Sorry. Sorry, guys. We're out, had a mainline break this morning, and I'm trying to do this from 2 different places, it seems like. So I haven't heard all of the conversation, but you're talking about aeration.
Yes, how often do you aerate, and what do you have for recovery time?
Well, the first aerification of the year is usually done in December, as soon as we're done with the fall renovation. At that point, the track is deep tined with a Wiedemann. Immediately after the Wiedemann, we go through with our Procore with 3/4 inch to 1 inch tines at a 2x2 spacing. We blow the cores off because we want to leave those aeration holes open as much as possible. And then we top dress immediately, fungicides, pre-emergence, and then we cover the whole track. As soon as the track starts recovering, we generally come back in again in March and April. We use the Procore again, blow all the cores off by hand to leave those aeration holes open as much as possible, top dress, brush it in, fungicide, cover, etc. And then we do a deep tine aerification 1 month after that. We do another deep tine aerification 1 month after that. And we're getting close to racing by that time. During racing, we do a deep tine aerification every single week, sometimes twice a week. So we do a lot of aerification. Again, this is a fairly tight track. It can tolerate the aerification. And quite frankly, I would rather, during the course of the race meet, I would rather mechanically soften it than have to soften it with water. That creates a whole other issue. So it's a little bit different from what a lot of people do, but it works for me here in Del Mar.
So Leif, what are the settings on your aerator when you go do the deep tine?
We have 3 of the big Wiedemanns, the biggest ones they make, and we use the 1/2 inch tines at full heave, as maximum as much heave as we can get. We go any place between 1.25 and 2 miles an hour, depending on how much softening we want. And like you said, that's during the race meet, that's once a week. That's once a week. So most of you do not do that. In fact, I'll bet you don't do that. But for a warm season grass in Del Mar with a very tight turf where you don't get any rain, it works for us. It works for me. In fact, if I did not have these big Wiedemann units, we would have issues. If we go the opposite way the horses run, it literally lifts and levels, takes all the indentations out, takes the pock marks out, and leaves the track virtually perfect. And if it starts getting a little bit tight or a little bit firm come Friday night or Saturday, we might come in and do another light aerification on Saturday night. But that's the races. During the non-races, you know, we have an Air 2 G2 machine that we use. We have 2 large Toro Pro cores. We have a large Dakota top dresser, and we top dress the track twice a year. Pull cores twice a year. Vertidrain, you know, it's going on probably 8-9 months out of the year, or Wiedemann. So we do a lot of aerification.
I think you've kind of answered this, Leif, but do you use a roller, or is it just aerating backwards to get smooth out your surface?
Never used a roller, never would use a roller. I think anyone that uses a roller has to have a very good reason for doing it. If you have a looser turf, more of a USGA profile, I think there are cases where you can do that. But myself, when you're using the Wiedemann's with a front and rear roller on it, I really have, I've never used a roller. I don't even own one. Don't even own one. So that would make it, to me, too hard. That's counterproductive to what you're trying to do.
Well, going back to the cool weather grasses, Sean, do you want to talk about use of a roller, if and when?
Sure. Yes, we will use a roller, use a 5-gang roller, and I would say it's a necessary tool, but also use it as little as possible. And I would say, if you're running a lot of races in a week, maybe, you're coming up to the last day of the week and, you feel the track's a bit loose, or you've had to run on an off surface and it hasn't tightened up quite as well, and you want to run the roller over it just to smooth it out, then we would do that. Or we'll even just roll a turn. If the turn's taking a lot of wear and tear, we can get on and get off and roll the turn without getting into the rest of the course. Having said that, I do think whenever you roll, you may get the positive effect on that day or for that week, but in the long term, then there's a negative impact that you have to deal with at some point in time, or correct some point in time, by going back in and renovating that area or aerating it. So this isn't something you can just keep on doing without going in and then remediating the area.
And again, as a reminder, at Woodbine, there's quite a long race meet that you have to survive through. And now, of course, with 2 turf courses, that helps quite a bit too, because you can get off it.
Yes, that's right.
Or 3 turf courses. I don't know how you count them.
Yeah. So look, getting back to Del Mar, the reason we aerify so much is because we have a very tight sand. A sand that doesn't drain that well. When the track was originally put in, there was no concept of a fall race meet at all. So we didn't even put in a drainage layer. Because of that, because the track is so tight, if we didn't aerify as often as we do, we would have issues. So, yeah, so that's kind of the reason we do what we do and why we do it.
So Jim, did you want to comment at all on use of a roller?
Sure. I think, we're on opposite ends of the spectrum here, and we've got a different turf track than what Sean and Leif have, from the standpoint of the amount of sand and the drainage that we have. Our track is really well drained. Water goes right through it. And we've been rolling pretty much since I got here, and we've actually increased that. And we're at the point now where we roll almost every day after the race meet. And we rolled a couple of times during the race meet this past spring. And we, with the going stick and the measurements, we're not seeing any compaction in the racetrack. So we're really happy with the results that we get rolling at the end of the day to take the footprints out. And the turf seems to handle it fine. We're not showing any major compaction or isolated compaction from rolling. And it's a much better surface for us.
You have more of a USGA profile though, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And I think Leif's got one of the key points there, and that's understanding the maintenance in the context of the profile that's used on these different surfaces becomes an important question that needs to be answered. All right, well, thank you so much for that panel.
This is Karen, and this is her land. She's been here a long time, along with Mojo. The first fence post went up here. Now there's 5,000 of them. After the storm, she started the cleanup here. And when she needs some peace and quiet, she always finds it right here. This is more than just land, it's home. Karen runs with us on a John Deere 3E Series tractor, because who says a day's work has to take all day? Nothing runs like a Deere. Search John Deere 3E Series for more.
Being a teenager and in high school and middle school is not easy for girls these days. And they get to come here, spend time working around the farm, spend time with the animals, and not feel that pressure until we go to horse shows. The first time I saw this land, I was about 12 years old. I came here with an old mentor. I fell in love with it as a little girl, and I said I was gonna own it one day. My mother, when I was 4 years old, put me on a little pony walking around the zoo. That was it for me. Love at first sight. Like any kid, when I was younger, I wanted to compete more in the Olympics and go Grand Prix and do things like that. But I put that all on the side and realized I had a different agenda in life. I've taught about 800 kids in this area. A typical day starts early in the morning with feeding the horses. Then usually we clean stalls. This is a daily chore, sometimes twice a day. I'm always on the tractor, mowing, spreading things around, you name it. This is a John Deere 3025B. I love my tractor. I couldn't live without it. I like to just relax and be left alone. I call it my husband. He's very reliable, and it doesn't argue. It's so easy to use. My 68-year-old mother has never driven anything like this before, and she was scared to death of it. And once she did, she loves it. She drives it all the time for me and helps me out around the farm. Being here in Florida, we deal with a lot of hurricanes, so it can be very stressful when we're in the path of one. That John Deere helps me so much. We go around picking up debris, moving, pushing things with the bucket. I always have an average of 50 students, so whenever there's a disaster that comes around, they're always here and they're ready to work. I call all my girls my kids. They're like part of my family, and they get scholarships for riding, and so we try to keep our sport here a little bit serious but fun. We go to the horse shows. It's great for them. Good, very nice. Teaches them a lot of sportsmanship, how to be more in charge and have more self-confidence. A little stronger on that. There. The parents tell me all the time, you are such a huge influence in our child's life. I love to share my experience with these girls and be able to steer them in a better path. Everybody always asks me, how do you keep doing this? I say, just the sheer passion of it. What am I gonna do? Get a condo on the beach somewhere? I'm happier here. I'm Karen Neese, and this is my land.